Oh my god, honey, pause right there. Look at the Klingon in the alley. They do have two of everything.
Welcome to The Spinal Frontier, a podcast where we speculate as to why Star Trek aliens are the way they are. I'm Eryn, they, them.
And I'm Kelley, she, her. Eryn just took charge there. It's another one of our elusive species episodes. Talked a lot about Klingons here and there in a bunch of different topics because there's been a lot of lore about them, but let's look at the holistic Klingon. So, hun, why don't you introduce us to who the Klingons are, as if there's anybody who listens to our podcast who is that far under a rock.
So the Klingons are a long-running alien species on Star Trek, and in the original series, they were a recurring villain. In The Next Generation, we had our first Klingon Starfleet officer in Lieutenant Worf, and then from then on, they were just sort of tenuous allies with the Federation until until Discovery, right? No, until Enterprise, which was a prequel. Mm-hmm. So was Discovery.
Yes.
So that relationship hadn't been established yet.
And is that that's kind of why we don't have Klingons in Strange New Worlds either.
Right.
Yeah.
I think they may be keeping them for season 2.
Before we get into the physiology, there is a little bit of like low-key racist phenotypes with the original mustachioed nature of the TOS Klingons. Mm-hmm. They had to change their appearance quite a bit to put them in TNG. Yeah. They were kind of Asian coded and in not a great way.
No, not a very nice depiction.
No, I'm really glad that this franchise has made leaps and bounds since the 60s. Mm-hmm. Go you guys. Okay, so let's talk about the Klingons that we do know and the ones that we're going to think about. We've talked a bunch about Klingons in general, like I said, but we have our very stereotypical Klingon is Worf. He's in, 3 franchises now?
Yeah, he was introduced into The Next Generation. Then he was part of the main cast in Deep Space Nine, and he's back in season 3 of Picard. So yeah,
that's not a spoiler. You've seen the commercials. Don't come at us.
Hopefully, you've seen the commercials.
Is he second only to Brent Spiner in how many franchises he's been in? No one will ever beat Brent Spiner.
Or call him Meanie. I don't know where he ranks. I think he's only been in 2. Huh?
Well, technically, he's mentioned in Lower Decks. But...
yeah. Does a golden statue of a person count as an appearance?
If the statue doesn't have lines.
Okay.
Yeah, he didn't get paid for that. Anyway,
back to the transporter room.
Okay, so we have our straightforward Klingon. Mm-hmm. We also, when we talked about hybridization and we talked about characters who have multiple humanoid lineages, B'Elanna Torres, obviously, and her progeny. Yeah. They have some of the Klingon traits, and some of the Klingon traits kind of supersede the human ones, it seems like. Mm-hmm. And then finally, one of the ones I want to bring up later is one of the many exciting Klingons from Discovery is Ash Tyler, a.k.a. Voq. Yep. Just because of the extent of how much the Klingon medical technology seems kind of rudimentary until you get to this point where they are so good at plastic surgery that they get down to the DNA nuclear level and are able to completely change or mostly change the signatures. That's nuts. But we'll get into that. Yeah. Pre-plastic surgery, what are some of these distinct features that we think of when we think of Klingons?
So for the iconic Klingon look, which is going to be like the Next Generation / the motion picture going forward, so we think of Worf, right? And that's going to be, they have very prominent head ridges.
On very prominent heads.
It's
very much
right on the forehead.
Well, the hairline starts on top of the head. There's very much forehead there.
Yep, and it's kind of like, the ridges are different depending on family lines. So Worf's kind of comes up to a point, and there's a bunch of them. And I think, so B'Elanna's forehead ridges point downwards, unlike Worf's. And then Gowron has kind of like a bumpy head. So
he's gotten beat up a lot. That's probably, I don't know how much of that is actually inherited. We did talk about Klingon skulls before when we talked about skulls because they have such thick bones and such reinforced, dense bone because they're so physically aggressive.
Yeah.
Like, they've evolved some pretty serious traits that have made them be very hard to hurt, I guess. I mean, they get hurt all the time and they don't care, but they also have a lot of protective structures, and this thick, bony skull is definitely one of them.
Yeah, yes. They also have, like, really sharp teeth, and I am not sure if that's natural or if they file them like Ferengi.
I don't know. They might be just broken. I think they just bite each other a lot because their teeth are really not regular, as far as I can tell.
Worf did buy a tooth sharpener from Quark, but he also seemed a little bit unsure about what it was, so I'm not sure if he's seen one before.
He's never been to a dentist.
Yeah.
Assuredly. Well, actually, that's a lie. Spoilers for season 3 Picard. Worf has been to the dentist.
Yes, he's got some pearly whites. They're still pointy and Klingon-like, but he's been flossing.
Maybe that's his like Zen practice that he does.
Self-care.
Sure.
And then in the Star Trek biology text that we have, the Klingons are also shown to have this spike on their foot. Like,
we see it in shoes too.
Yeah.
Like, or they hang out of their boots or something. Like,
their boots have like a metal spike on the top of their foot that, like one would assume is decorative. But if the non-canonical Star Trek biology texts are to be believed, there's actually a spike there on their foot.
Yeah, it's protective of that spike.
It's a spike sheath.
I feel like it's a bit of a Duclass situation.
Oh, yeah?
It's probably a bit vestigial at this point. Maybe that's why they protect it, but they don't want to get rid of it because, like, it's pretty BA to have, like, this big...
So how big is that foot spike?
It looks like it's a couple inches.
Okay, because I was wondering that the texts also, like, exaggerate musculature and stuff. So I was wondering if maybe the big spike on the boot isn't reflective of the actual size.
Ooh, I'm confident we've seen. There's got to be some Klingon foot, but I don't want to look that up because the internet is a scary place.
Yeah, no, I know that we've probably seen Worf's feet before, but I don't want to look up pictures of that. I don't want that in my search history.
No, it's kind of a Schrodinger's Klingon's foot horn.
Yeah, there we go.
So they might have a prominent foot horn that they are protecting or exaggerating with this metal spike on the outside of their shoe.
Like a feather in their cap, or
maybe
elaborate codpiece,
or maybe it's like really withered down, like over. They don't use it anymore, and so maybe there's a little bit of a bump there, but it's not really a horn anymore.
It's vestigial foot horn.
Yeah, it's one of those two things. I'm not Googling it. You Google it, listener, not us. So we have these foot horns. Generally, I'm guessing it'd probably be like what you would expect with male roosters or potentially like stingrays that have probably keratin, probably made of the same stuff as our fingernails and hair, that are meant for scratching during battle.
Is that on their tail?
Stingrays, it's mounted, on top of their tail, and they kind of whip it around.
Okay.
I've been stung by a stingray before. I accidentally kicked one in undergrad, and it cut into my foot and ripped back out, just into my toe. Just like as far as stings go, it was the babiest. Like it was the least cool version. I did have to go get my foot boiled at the lifeguard station, but...
This might surprise you listeners because this is a biology podcast, but I have a weak constitution when it comes to wounds.
Yeah, that's why they're the engineer and I'm the biologist.
I'm making a face right now. You can't see it, but it's...
They're going to puke in our closet.
No, that's not that bad. I'm just a little bit horrified.
Meanwhile, I've for sure eaten lunch next to the thing I was in the middle of dissecting, so... I'm a monster. We know this. Anyway, continuing on. So they have this horn that's probably for stinging or for like scratching or stabbing. But I do wonder if, because we'll talk about the Genesis episode where Worf de-evolves, but I wonder if there maybe is, like a stingray, some venom element to, or was some venom element to that spike as well.
Oh, that would be really interesting.
I mean, it sounds about right. They've evolved a lot of different weaponry, so it could be.
And then they're also mentioned to have redundant organs.
Yes.
And Yeah, I know. I want to say it's the one where Worf gets Donkey Konged into sickbay by the barrel.
Probably.
And then they're like, oh, Klingons have 2 of everything. But that doesn't make sense because it's a spinal injury, and he factually does not have 2 spines.
No, does not have 2 spines. I think this is probably Greatest Generation wink to that podcast, because in Discovery, there is a Klingon peeing in an alley.
Oh.
And
yeah.
that was their joke on that podcast.
The podcast that famously asked if they have 2 of everything.
Yes.
Yeah.
But then the wink was there were 2 streams. So this made us wonder how many things are supposed to be duplicate. And I looked at there's a 1970s Starfleet medical manual that talks about kind of the quote unquote major humanoid species, the one that we know a lot about. And Klingons are obviously one of them. But I'm going to read the paragraph.
Okay, yeah.
Because I have questions. And of course, this is not necessarily canon, although it is a Paramount produced thing from the 70s. So, like, it's not nothing.
It's beta canon, like a lot of the novels.
Yeah. Products of bioengineering. What? Klingons are a race selectively bred for efficiency by way of carefully controlled gene pools and strict government supervision. What? As a result of the rapid Klingon metabolism, that makes sense, the stomach is equipped with 2 duodenums? They said they didn't pluralize. Duodenopathies, which allow for a greater flow of digested material to pass on to the small intestines. Physician, take note, the Klingon small intestines are a complex series of highly efficient step-like levels, first descending and then ascending to the large intestine. Also note the 2 large independent livers, which result in the higher than hominid average body temperature. It says temperature / pulse / respiration rates, and the temperature is 96. They don't say 96 what?
Then that would be Celsius.
Okay, I wish they would put it on. Well, it would make sense also because all their other measurements are in standard SI units. Mm-hmm. So, like, metric system mostly.
So Klingons run really hot then?
I guess.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, that high metabolism situation makes sense to me because if they have these huge livers... I think I might have mentioned it before, but I think a lot of Klingon physiology reminds me a lot of sharks. Because they have 2 livers. So a big liver in an animal can be for energy storage because livers are where if you don't have a lot of fat, another way your body can store energy is by converting glucose to glycogen and store it in the liver. And so Klingons have 2 livers. It seems like they're storing a lot of energy in order to fuel all of their extra organs. I will say, because they're producing this really thick bone, I have a lot of thoughts about Klingon physiology that we haven't really talked about yet, but because long bones is where human bodies produce red blood, white blood cells. Klingons have a lot of big bones. And so I'm wondering if part of that supports this really high energy. I've never seen a Klingon that has a lot of adipose tissue either. They're all pretty athletic. And so I've seen them.
Like Kempek was a bigger guy.
Bigger, but there's still a lot of muscle there.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking that a lot of their evolution is really meant to support this really high level body. And so we have this high metabolism, which is how you're creating and using cellular energy. And so they have to take in a lot of oxygen and move a lot of oxygen around. That's what your blood is for. I mean, we talked about their blood. It was pink in the one movie, which would be more like hemerythrin. Everything else is red. And so I'm guessing that they're really using hemoglobin. And that's why there's multiple instances of Klingon human hybridization. But I think they might be pushing the edge of how big they can be or how much they can use, because you have to be constantly producing red blood cells. They fight a lot and they bleed a lot. Everything they do involves getting beat up or cutting themselves or whatever. And so they bleed a lot. And so I worry that they're always on the edge of anemia. Because they have all of these bones and it's hopefully producing enough red blood cells, but they do bleed a lot, and so they need to make sure that they're maintaining their iron levels and stuff. And so I think that's why blood wine exists in their diet and gach.
Oh, okay. So blood wine feels self-explanatory, but what about Gach?
There are many kinds of worm that have many kinds of respiratory pigments. We talked about this in the blood respiratory pigments episode early on in Spinal Frontier. But earthworms, which is what we experience Gach to be made out of, I think there's sometimes dirt in it, so that would make sense. If they're earthworms, they're segmented worms, and most segmented worms use hemoglobin, which we use in our blood. And so I think they're drinking blood wine and eating Gach like crazy to supplement all of the bleeding they've been doing so that they don't become anemic trying to recover from constant injury.
That would be really interesting.
That is my big Klingon revelation as I was thinking about this topic. So that's what we see currently. Do you want to talk about the potential? I mean, we talked about the progenitor of all the humanoids, but like, let's talk about halfway through between progenitor and modern Klingon.
Yeah, we talked about the progenitor in a previous episode.
We talked about a lot of stuff.
Yeah. So we're gonna, if you're curious about that, please feel free to go back. I think it's episode 3 or 4. So yeah, coming from the progenitor moving forward, there's an episode of The Next Generation called Genesis, and I think it's probably the Next Generation's Threshold. I think it's fun. It's a fun episode. It's kind of a creepy episode. But in it, like Captain Picard and a couple other people on his away team come back to the Enterprise and find it is like out of power and they can't find anybody. And then like when they do find people, they're in various stages of de-evolution, which is not a real thing. But like, for instance, Riker is like a Homo erectus. Yeah, like a caveman.
Caveman.
Caveman. Worf is the Minotaur in the labyrinth.
Basically.
And he's really interesting.
Really scary.
Really scary. His brow ridges are way bigger and more prominent, which is saying something. He has an exoskeleton. He's got these big, like, his jawbones, like his mandibles, extend into, like, points. And I'm kind of wondering if they're supposed to articulate like a... like a bug's,
or like Predator, is it Alien?
Which
one is
Predator?
That? Yeah,
but we don't see that in the episode, so I don't know. He's also got venom sacs on his face, and he can spit like an acid, and that's really scary.
Honestly, it's kind of nice because it kind of makes me feel like I can see some of the evolutionary history of these humanoids. Because I'm like, that's kind of corny to spit acid, venom, and it's kind of Tellarite to have these big tusks going on. So I'm like, I appreciate these common evolutions. Sure.
So yeah, what could that tell us about the environment the Klingons evolved in? What
we do know is that they evolved eventually away from that exoskeleton, and they have an internal skeleton, again, super thick, really crazy thick skull, very pointy, lots of ridges and horns and whatever, kind of small underneath the skin. And they also have gnarly teeth, and they also have these really thick, wide vertebrae and a honeycomb-like rib cage.
Oh, yeah.
Which I think I've talked about before because it's weird because it doesn't leave any room for expansion. And so I don't know if it's just to like reduce the amount, like instead of getting stabbed in the ribs or something, like maybe because a honeycomb shape is a really strong shape.
Yeah.
So potentially it helps them have kind of a stronger rib cage. I just don't know how their lungs expanded there because it doesn't look like it moves. But if you look at what we know about the biology of Konosh, that's Kronos for everybody else. I don't know. Discovery has poisoned me. I can't stop calling it Konosh. It's like I've been to Ibiza. Barcelona. But Konosh is apparently super tilted on its axis and has really unstable and extreme weather and climate. And so it seems like they need to have evolved initially really extreme traits in order to deal with that. And so they needed to have a lot of external protection because maybe there's hurricanes throwing stuff around. There's some kind of indication that there's being a cave planet and they live in subterranean caves because of the extreme weather.
Yeah.
And we see some cave action and cave temples and stuff in different
we
franchises.
do. You're right.
Mm-hmm.
Ooh, cool.
And so they're having like kick fights with their foot horns in caves is how they evolve to weather extreme storms and hot temperatures and whatever.
That's awesome.
I thought. But the thing is, having some of those, like having an exoskeleton is very more invertebrates have those things, have those innovations, because besides armor, exoskeletons are really good at keeping an animal from drying out if they're in an extreme heat situation. So it kind of keeps their moisture contained, and that's why crabs, you have exoskeletons, because they can go, or shore crabs anyway, they can go out of the water for a long time and come back in and still be okay.
Cool.
So I'm willing to bet that those exoskeletons also helped with extreme weather until the Klingons developed enough technology to have climate control. And at that point, they didn't necessarily have to have this strong external armor, and so they probably developed their internal bones probably developed a little bit better.
Okay.
And they lost the exoskeleton stuff.
Whoa. I wonder if at any point in their history they had like a surface dweller versus cave people.
Probably.
Struggle.
They constantly are fighting with each other about all kinds of stuff. They love to pick sides, and they're dramatic. What a dramatic group.
Very true.
Dramatic species. And I mean, that's what you get when you cooped up with each other in caves for long enough. You start to pick fights with each other.
I've seen Survivor.
Yeah. That's another interesting thing about them, is that because they form houses, like they make these really strong familial groups and kind of social groups, we see a lot of differences in traits. So there's a lot of humanoid species in Star Trek that just have one skin color, for instance, like an Orion is an Orion is an Orion, an Andorian is an Andorian. You can tell because they're blue, and if they're an Anar, they're a subspecies. They're like totally different. Klingons, we've seen such a variety of skin tones and hair textures and face shapes, and like they're just so different compared to like any other Star Trek species, except for maybe, including humans. They're about akin to humans.
Vulcans,
maybe less so. I think the more visible Vulcans tend to be particular. I mean, I guess 50% of the Vulcan viewing on Star Trek is just someone who is Spock or related to Spock. So I guess that's what I'm thinking of. But yeah, Klingons can be white. They can be blue. They can be brown. They could be violet sky. I'm just getting into a song.
Oh no, I guess you're right. Is that we see a little bit more bluish and violet even in like Discovery and Lower Decks. I think.
Loved that retcon. Like I loved the design of Klingons in the new.
That is a very controversial statement.
I said what I said.
I liked it too. But like speaking of the way Klingons look, kind of redesigns. This is the elephant in the room when talking about Klingons, but they change from the original series to the Next Generation, which we kind of already went over. And then they change again from like TNG, Deep Space Nine, Voyager. In Discovery, they're redesigned again. The reason for that is updating the look with updated technology. Like they can do more, so they want to do more. That was the original stated reason for the redesign in the motion picture in the Next Generation. When asked about it, I think Gene Roddenberry said, "This is the way I would have made them if I had the technology, so they've always looked like this." Which,
perfect.
For me, that's a perfectly satisfying answer, but that's, not everybody likes that, and that's also okay. So in Enterprise, there was a 2-parter episode where they explained why the original series Klingons look the way they do. And it's because the Klingon Empire stole human genetic augmentation technology in order to make their own super soldiers, but they used human augment DNA. And so those original series Klingons we see have like human DNA in them. That's
the reasoning.
the reasoning, yeah.
And like that kind of ties back to the 70s medical manual that says they're products of genetic bioengineering.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and they have the bioengineering technology to turn Voq into Ash Tyler, right? Like they can do a memory wipe and basically a molecular level or cellular level change. Clearly very painful, but I think, I think it's interesting that they have they've always had such high-level body modification technology. I think the reason why this is different than the Illyrians, who they're genetically modified and therefore not allowed in Starfleet in the same way, it's probably, like, I can see a world in which it's because they do it to individuals and not to everybody.
Right. Right.
And so, like, as long as you as an individual are not genetically modified.
Yeah, so, like, I don't think Worf was.
No.
Because he was a pretty original-looking Klingon.
Right. So I wonder if, like, some houses will, for funsies. Because they're like, what?
Dabble.
They dabble. Yeah, they're like, I would like mermaid skin. Here we go. It's clearly they're Klingon spies everywhere, and so they have the technology to change body forms and whatever. So, yeah, I wonder.
There's a very big range of philosophies between the houses. You know, like the Duras family has its own idea of what the best thing to do is vis-a-vis being good Klingons, and the house of like Martok and Moog don't agree with that, and
they are such a big, broad society. They started on Konosh, on this really, really chaotic planet, hiding in caves. And once they kind of came into their own and started diversifying, then they were able to get into space and break into their own groups and really diversify as a species, which I think is really cool.
Yeah, I think the Klingon lawyer in Enterprise talks about how there was a time when Klingons didn't have such an emphasis on the warrior caste, and there were more artists and more doctors and more lawyers, and then something happened in their society just before the time of Enterprise.
It's called fascism, folks.
Yeah. Their culture changed, and it changed really fast, and people like that lawyer felt sad by that, by what their people were becoming. Yeah. Yeah.
Anyway.
Yeah.
On that note, I feel like we've kind of come through what all that we wanted to talk about, putting all that stuff together. I wanted to talk about it because we've never talked about how all of these things relate to their home world. Yeah. And that's what interests me, because
I didn't know anything about their planet's axial tilt. That really interests me because I'm into
space.
I'm really into that. Yeah.
No. All right. Well, on that note, thanks for sticking with us. We're trying to keep on a fairly regular schedule, but life happens.
Yeah, thanks for coming back after our unintentional break. Yeah. If you liked this episode, please subscribe on your favorite podcast listening app like Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube. We're adding more transcribed episodes there every month. While you're thinking about it, please rate us and leave us a review so other people can find us. If you didn't like this episode, dishonor on your house.
Ditto. You can follow us both on Tumblr and Instagram at Spinal Frontier Pod. We've also been on Where's Beverly and Trexperts quiz recently, so you should definitely check out our friends' shows as well. If you have any topics, suggestions, or questions, we're always excited to hear from you. Okay, honey, you can press play.